All right, so today we're gonna like really zero in on something
Okay.
that's super important for English learners, and that is listening and speaking practice.
Yes.
And the really cool thing is that you, our listeners, you shared some awesome material with us.
Yeah?
You sent over a podcast
Good day.
that featured these two folks, Mary and Jack, and they were chatting about their methods for practicing listening and speaking.
Yeah.
So our goal today is
Yeah.
to like go beyond just summarizing their main points
Right.
and really like dig into the like best and most effective strategies that they talk about.
Okay.
And also like understand why these techniques can help unlock fluency for you.
I love it.
Yeah.
The material you sent
Yeah.
is a great place for us to start.
Okay.
Mary and Jack give some really practical advice.
Right.
And today,
Yeah.
we don't just want to repeat what they said.
Okay.
We want to explore the reasons behind why those suggestions work so well
Interesting.
for language learning.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. We're searching for those aha moments, the ones that help you understand why certain practices are better than others.
Gotcha.
You know, for learning a language. Okay, so let's unpack this core idea.
Yeah.
Mary and Jack both emphasize that consistent listening and speaking practice, it's not just a good suggestion, it's essential.
Yeah.
It's like the foundation
the foundation, yeah.
of fluency in English.
It is.
But they also say something really important. It's not just about how much time you spend practicing.
Right.
It's about the kind of practice that makes the difference.
Exactly. That's the nuance.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people focus on the more obvious things when learning a language.
Right.
Things like grammar rules.
Memorizing tons of vocabulary words.
Yeah.
And while those are definitely parts of learning a language,
Right.
they don't automatically mean you can just jump into a real conversation and understand everything.
Right.
and speak easily at a natural speed.
Totally. And Mary even shared her own experience with this
Oh, really?
when she was learning Spanish.
Interesting.
She like really focused on the grammar rules.
Okay.
She felt good about it, you know, on paper.
Yeah.
But then when she actually had to speak Spanish with someone, she just froze up
Wow.
because she couldn't keep up with how fast they were speaking.
I can see that.
It's something I think a lot of learners can relate to.
For sure. For sure.
You know?
And Jack had a similar experience
Oh, yeah.
with learning French.
Interesting.
He could understand individual words,
Okay.
no problem.
Huh.
But when they were all strung together in a sentence
Right.
or spoken with an accent he wasn't used to,
Yeah.
the meaning would just completely disappear.
Yeah.
And this highlights something crucial.
Okay.
You know, listening and actually processing natural speech
Mm,
is a skill all by itself.
right.
It's not the same as simply knowing what the words mean.
It's totally different.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is probably something that resonates with you as the learner, too. We hear all the time about how hard it is to deal with fast speech and
Right.
different accents
Yeah.
and that nervousness that comes with actually trying to speak and maybe making mistakes.
Right. And that's where the interesting part comes in.
Yeah.
Mary and Jack talk about the ultimate goal here,
Yeah.
which is basically training your brain
Uh-huh.
to work in English.
Okay.
So instead of constantly translating in your head,
Right.
you start to process and create thoughts and answers directly in English.
Wow.
And that shift
Yeah.
is a really good sign that your fluency is improving.
I can see that.
And they highlight that the best way to make that happen
Okay.
is by practicing listening and speaking consistently.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Right.
And they also pointed out this really interesting connection
And what's that?
between listening comprehension and speaking confidence.
Okay.
It's like they feed into each other. It's not just one way.
I see.
Like, obviously,
Yeah.
the better you understand what you're hearing,
Yeah.
the more confident you'll feel about trying to speak.
Right.
But they also say that the act of speaking itself, like physically making the sounds and using the sentence structures,
Yeah.
that actually trains your ear
Interesting.
and improves your listening comprehension.
Okay.
So it's like this cycle.
Yeah.
You know.
It's a feedback loop.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They really reinforce each other.
Exactly. And if we think about skills in general,
Yeah.
it makes sense they're all connected. These aren't just isolated parts of language.
Right.
They all work together and help each other.
I like that.
The podcast argues that
Yeah.
consistent focused practice
Mm-hmm.
is what really gets this positive cycle going.
So they made a strong argument
Yeah.
for why this type of practice is so important.
Right.
So now let's get into the how.
Oh.
What specific listening strategies did they recommend?
So one of the most basic things they suggest is to move away from what they call passive listening
Okay.
and towards active listening.
Interesting.
Think of passive listening as having English on in the background
Uh-huh.
while you're doing something else.
Okay.
You might pick up a few things,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really train your brain
Right.
to understand things better.
Gotcha.
Active listening is different.
Okay.
It means you're paying attention
Uh-huh.
and really trying to understand.
So what does that look like?
Right.
Like practically?
Yeah, good question.
How do we make our listening more active?
Well, one thing they mention
Yeah.
is to use those little pauses that happen naturally in speech.
Okay.
When the speaker stops for a second,
Yeah.
you can try to repeat in your mind what you just heard.
That makes sense.
And it's not just about repeating the words.
Uh-huh.
It's about processing the sounds, the rhythm of the sentence, the structure.
Right.
And this helps you remember it better.
So your brain's actively rehearsing and internalizing those patterns
Yes,
in real time.
that's right.
What else do they recommend?
They also talk about taking notes.
Okay.
But importantly,
Yeah.
they say you shouldn't try to write down every word.
Right. That'd be too much.
It would be overwhelming
Yeah.
and could actually hurt your learning.
Okay.
Instead,
Yeah.
focus on writing down keywords
Uh-huh.
or key phrases.
Okay. Okay.
This helps you actively engage with what you're hearing.
Right.
You can pick out the main ideas,
Mm-hmm.
follow the flow of the conversation,
Right.
and learn important vocabulary
Gotcha.
without getting bogged down in the details.
I appreciate that clarification about the note-taking
Yeah.
because the idea of transcribing everything
Mhm.
just sounds really overwhelming.
It can be.
They also talk about gradually increasing the difficulty, right?
Yes. They suggest starting with audio content
Okay.
that's a bit slower or on topics you already know something about.
Right.
As you get better,
Yeah.
you can challenge yourself with faster speech, more complex words,
Uh-huh.
and a bigger range of accents.
Makes sense.
This gradual approach gives your brain time to adjust
Right.
without feeling overwhelmed or like you want to give up.
And they also suggest something really simple but powerful.
Okay, what's that?
Listening to things multiple times.
Oh, yes. Repetition is key.
I've heard this advice before,
Right.
but it's good to understand why it works so well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you listen to something the first time,
Yeah.
your main goal is to get the general idea,
Okay.
the gist of what's being said.
Gotcha.
But when you listen again,
Yeah.
you can focus on the smaller details
Uh-huh.
you might have missed the first time.
Right.
Pay attention to how words are pronounced,
Okay.
the way the speaker's voice goes up and down,
Yeah.
and you can pick out new words and figure out their meanings from the context.
Right, right.
So listening multiple times
Yeah.
really helps your brain learn the sounds and the natural flow of English.
Cool.
So,
Cool.
okay.
And they also briefly mentioned shadowing.
Yes.
As a technique that's kind of related to listening practice,
Mm-hmm.
although they said they'll explain it more when they talk about speaking.
Right.
It sounds interesting, though.
It is.
Before we move on to speaking,
Yeah.
they had this moment where they encourage the listener
Uh-huh.
to think about their own listening habits
Okay.
and how they've been listening recently.
I see.
And I think that's really effective.
It is, because it encourages you to put the ideas into practice right away.
Exactly.
They want you to think about how you listen
Mm-hmm.
and choose one specific technique.
Yeah.
You can try to be more active the next
Mhm.
time you listen to something in English.
Yes.
So they're bridging that gap
Uh-huh.
between understanding an idea and actually using it.
That's a good point.
It's about taking small steps to improve.
All right, so we've got some really good listening strategies
We do.
to work with.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to speaking.
Okay.
Mary and Jack acknowledged right away.
That speaking can be scary for a lot of English learners.
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Because it's a common feeling.
Right.
It helps create a more supportive atmosphere
Uh-huh.
to introduce those practical strategies
Okay.
to overcome that nervousness.
Cool.
And one of the first and possibly most effective techniques they talk about is shadowing.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned that earlier.
That's it.
So they describe shadowing as listening to a native speaker and
Huh.
trying to repeat what they're saying at the same time.
At the same time, yes.
And you're supposed to mimic their rhythm and intonation
Exactly.
as closely as you can.
Yes.
That sounds pretty intense.
It can be challenging.
But what are the specific benefits?
Well, shadowing is great for a few things.
Okay.
First, it directly improves your pronunciation
Mm-hmm.
because you're forced to make the same sound as
Right.
a native speaker.
Yeah.
Second, it's great for improving your intonation,
Okay.
which is how your voice rises and falls when you speak.
Right.
And that's important for sounding natural
Mm-hmm.
and getting your meaning across
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah.
And
Mm.
third,
Yeah.
by trying to keep up with the speaker,
Mm-hmm.
you can actually improve your speaking speed and fluency.
So it's a total workout.
It is.
For your speaking skills.
Exactly. It's a great way to fine-tune your speaking instrument.
Love that.
Right.
So what other techniques did they suggest?
They talked about role-playing.
Okay.
Which involves practicing conversations based on everyday situations.
Like what?
Like asking for directions, ordering food at a restaurant, or just having a simple chat with someone.
Right.
By practicing these exchanges, you get more comfortable with real-world interactions.
Right.
And you build confidence in using common phrases and vocabulary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like mentally rehearsing for those situations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what if you don't have someone to practice with?
That's where self-talk comes in. Mary and Jack suggest talking to yourself in English.
Really?
Yes.
Out loud?
Out loud.
Wow.
It might feel strange at first.
Yeah.
But it's a super low-pressure way to get comfortable forming sentences and start thinking in English.
Interesting.
Without worrying about making mistakes.
So you can start to build that inner English voice.
Exactly.
They also mentioned something I hadn't thought of before.
Oh, what's that?
Recording yourself speaking.
Ah, yes. That's a good one.
What do they say about that?
They say making recordings of yourself speaking can be really helpful.
Okay.
Although it can be a bit scary, too.
Yeah.
Listening back to yourself lets you really analyze your pronunciation, your grammar, how fluent you sound.
Right.
Which is hard to do while you're actually speaking.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to figure out what you need to work on.
Cool.
Right.
And they also talk about these new AI-powered language learning apps.
Oh, yes. Those are really interesting.
Yeah, that's a pretty new thing.
It is.
What do they have to say about that?
Well, a lot of these apps can give you instant feedback on your pronunciation.
That's cool.
Which is really useful if you don't have a native speaker to help you.
So it's like having a pronunciation coach in your pocket.
Exactly.
I like that.
Right.
But maybe the most important point they make, and this is something I think a lot of learners struggle with, is that it's okay to make mistakes.
Absolutely. The fear of making mistakes can really stop people from learning.
Right.
Mary and Jack emphasize that mistakes are normal. They're not something to be afraid of.
Right.
They're actually a really important part of learning.
Okay.
It's through making mistakes, recognizing them, and then learning from them that you actually get better.
So perfection isn't the goal?
No, not at the beginning.
Okay.
The most important thing is to make an effort and to be willing to communicate.
So we've covered the how-to for both listening and speaking based on Mary and Jack's insights.
That's right.
So now, for you, the learner, where can you find the resources to actually put these techniques into practice?
Right.
Well, they actually gave some really helpful suggestions.
They did?
First, they recommend podcasts.
Okay.
Which makes sense since they have a podcast themselves.
Yeah.
They specifically suggest listening to their podcast, Fluent Life, as a great way to hear natural English conversations.
Right.
Different accents and a variety of topics.
Podcasts are really easy to find.
Yeah.
And they're often free.
It's a really convenient way to immerse yourself in the language.
For sure.
They also recommend language exchange apps as a way to connect with native speakers and practice in real time.
Exactly.
Can you tell us more about that?
So there are platforms like Tandem or Hello Talk where you can find native English speakers who want to learn your language so you can have conversations.
Cool.
And help each other practice.
It's like a win-win.
It is.
And for those who are like a more structured approach, they suggest looking into online language learning courses.
Right. There are platforms like Coursera and Udemy that often have affordable courses specifically designed to improve your English speaking and listening.
That sounds helpful.
They usually offer a structured plan and practice activities.
And beyond those options, they mention some resources that are even easier to find. Like English audiobooks, radio shows, TV series, and movies.
Yes, all of those are great for listening practice.
Yeah.
And they can help you learn more informal, everyday language and cultural stuff.
The key takeaway here, though, is what Mary and Jack really emphasized, which is to choose materials that you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important.
If you force yourself to listen to something boring, it's going to be hard to stay motivated.
Exactly. Learning should be fun. And if you're interested in what you're listening to or watching, you're more likely to keep practicing.
All right, so to wrap things up,
Okay.
let's recap those core listening and speaking strategies.
That's good.
That Mary and Jack shared with you, the learner.
So for listening, the main focus is to actively engage with the audio.
Okay.
Not just have it on in the background.
Right.
Things like repeating phrases in your head, jotting down keywords, and really focusing your attention can help you understand much better.
Okay.
And don't forget, listening to the same thing multiple times gives your brain a chance to really absorb all the little details of spoken English.
And for speaking,
yeah,
what are the key takeaways?
Shadowing is super effective.
Right.
You know, trying to mimic a native speaker's pronunciation and intonation at the same time.
Okay.
And self-talk.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate that.
Okay.
It's a great way to build confidence and fluency, especially when you don't have someone to practice with.
And it's important to remember to explore all the different resources out there, like podcasts, language exchange apps, online courses.
There are so many options.
To find what works best for you.
And keep trying new things.
Yeah.
You know, don't be afraid to experiment.
So here's a challenge for you, the learner.
Okay.
Starting today, can you set aside 15 minutes for focused listening practice?
15 minutes.
And another 15 minutes for active speaking practice.
I like it.
Try using one of the new techniques we talked about.
Okay.
Or explore one of the resources that we mentioned in this deep dive.
And as you're trying these new things, think about this.
Okay.
How do these techniques fit with how you're already learning English? Are there specific challenges you've been facing that you think these methods could help with?
That's a great question.
Yeah, think about it.
And what other questions do you have now that we've explored these important elements of English listening and speaking practice?
There's always more to learn and discover.
Yes.
And we hope this deep dive has given you a solid foundation and some exciting new tools to use on your journey.
Absolutely.
To becoming more fluent in English.
Yes. And thank you for listening to The Deep Dive.
Thanks for being here.